So back to what the Master Singing taught. So for the Pure Land practice, it's pretty straightforward. There are several sutras and chants. You chant those every day, and you kind of visualize
Mhm.
the Buddha and Pure Land, and wishing you and everybody else, including all the animals, insects, anything you can imagine or beyond your imagination, everybody's reborn in Pure Land. And for the chant on Zen, it's very simple. We do a lot of sitting meditation, and we do not visualize things. You use your breathing as a tool to bring to be aware of your current mind state,
Mhm.
and it's pretty much having an open awareness. And when you it's interesting when with the open awareness, you will be aware that your mind is being distracted by your thoughts and feelings. And if you can realize that, then you bring your awareness back to your breathing. So yeah,
Mhm.
seated meditation with breathing,
Mhm.
being
Mhm.
aware, that's pretty much the chant or chant
Mhm.
practice.
Okay, thanks. So if you're just joining us, I am here with Joyce Yu Chao, who is a practitioner at the Lincoln Zen Center and a Taiwanese Buddhist, and who has studied under one of the most important Dharma teachers, Buddhist teachers of the 20 to 21st century in Taiwan. And so this really gets us to starting to look at diversity within Buddhist traditions. And I want to share my screen for a little bit and then get back to peppering Joyce with more questions. But because part of this series is very much helping us all build inclusivity in our classrooms and across all aspects of SEC's campuses, I want to make sure that we got into the diversity of Buddhist traditions that Joyce was just talking about. And so, and I'll have this handout will be available on the Global Ed website. So the historical Buddha who lived in about the 5th century BCE in modern day Nepal, he compared his teachings to a raft. Basically, that teachings would take someone from a shore of suffering to a shore of liberation. But once somebody's reached the shore of liberation, the teachings could be abandoned. And so, what this set up really early within Buddhist tradition is the idea that it's called upaya, but it's this idea that all messages should be tailored to the audience. So, when you go to Taiwan, Buddhism is going to look very differently than Buddhism in Myanmar. Or Buddhism in Cambodia, or Buddhism in America, because the message should always be tailored to the audience. So this creates a great diversity in Buddhist traditions. And so the reason why we're going to look at all these is to understand the variety of Buddhisms that are in Nebraska, and to kind of go to nuance and what Joyce was talking about, these differences of Buddhist traditions. So one of the major branches of Buddhism is called Theravada, and this is in generally South and Southeast Asia. So Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos. Another major branch is called Mahayana. That's practiced in Taiwan. But then there's many parts within Mahayana. Similar to how in Christianity and Protestantism, there's a lot of different denominations of Protestantism. But this is practiced in China, Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, Tibet, Taiwan, and Mongolia. And here's a nun at Fo Guangshan. You've been to Fo Guangshan? Yes, yeah, many times, I'm sure. Me too, for conferences. It's so great. And then there is another sect, another big branch that sometimes is included in Mahayana and sometimes separate, called Vajrayana. And this is the diamond vehicle. And this is generally Tibetan Buddhism. So the Dalai Lama is one of the key figures for one group within Tibetan Buddhism. And many Tibetans believe that the Dalai Lama is the reincarnation of the previous Dalai Lama and is actually a living bodhisattva. A living, that term means someone who is enlightened. So these are the three major branches. And in Nebraska, we have all of them, actually. So in Lincoln, Ling Quang, and An Lac, these are both Vietnamese temples, so they're both Mahayana. The Lincoln Zen Center is another kind of Mahayana Buddhism. The Burmese Buddhist temple is Theravada. The Jewel Heart Tibetan Buddhism, that Buddhist group, is Vajrayana. In Omaha, the Quoc An temple is Vietnamese. The Karen Buddhist Society, Karen folks are an ethnic minority from Myanmar, from Burma. So they're majority Theravada. The Lincoln Zen Center is Mahayana. Soka Gakkai is another kind of Mahayana. That group actually began in the 1930s from Japan. The Honey Locust Society is based on the teachings of a Vietnamese teacher named Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh really started the mindfulness movement. So if you know the word mindfulness, very much came from Thich Nhat Hanh. And then in Plattsmouth and Grand Island, we have 2 Laotian temples. So this is all to say that Nebraska is far more diverse when it comes to Buddhist traditions than I think most people realize. And I just want to look at some images and then talk to Joyce specifically about Zen. And so we show all these just to make sure that people know that there are different kinds of Buddhism. And let's look at some images. So this is the Laotian temple in Grand Island. And what this group did is they actually got a former church and they're turning it into a temple. So it doesn't have the traditional architecture style of a Laotian temple. The Laotian temple in Wichita does. And so you can see the dragons, you can see kind of high peaks. That's kind of more of a traditional Theravada Laotian style. If we look at the Linh Quang Vietnamese Buddhist temple, that's just outside of Lincoln. So if you're in Lincoln or if you're in the surrounding areas, this is close to Denton on Pleasant Hill Road. And there are a lot of various aspects that's interesting in the architecture. The scenes in that main building, these are from the historical Buddha's enlightenment story. So his whole story of enlightenment, he's tempted in that story, that's being shown there. Here's a statue portraying the future Buddha. Many people have seen this big Buddha. He's not fat because he's gluttonous. He's fat because he's full of enlightenment. And so there's a lot of people have a misunderstanding about why he's so big. This temple has 7 windows, and there's this story in Buddhism that after being born, the Buddha took 7 steps. And so the 7 windows represent that. And then Joyce was talking about bodhisattvas and Buddhas and all these different beings, and on the doors of the temple represent those various kinds of enlightened beings, plus these like guardian kings. And finally, inside the Buddha hall during the Dharma service, culturally within Vietnamese Buddhism, that's influenced by some beliefs in Chinese Buddhism as well. If you have a loved one who has died, you honor that loved one at 7 days of post-death, at 49 days post-death, and then at 100 days, and then every year on their death date, just like a birth date. 49 days is, in some Buddhist traditions, believed to be the time between one life and the next. So that's when they're honoring them. And so the white scarves are being worn by the mourning family members. And so I show these images because you can already see that this scene looks very different than the Zen Center scene. And so it's showing you the varieties of Buddhist traditions so that when we have students who are coming from different cultural backgrounds and Buddhist backgrounds, knowing that it's very, very diverse. And so Zen Buddhism, that Chan that Joyce is going to talk about, it began in China as Chan. It comes from the Sanskrit word dhyana, which means meditation. And in China, it blends with other kinds of practice, but in Japan, it became its own practice. And one of those subsects is Soto Zen, and that's what's practiced in Lincoln. And so from the Lincoln Zen Center itself, really thinking that the heart of Zen is selfless meditation, offers a time for quiet, disciplined practice. So I really wanted to kind of set that context just to really bring in the diversity within Buddhist traditions, because when you Google Buddhism, you either see a monk or you see the fat Buddha or you see someone just sitting in meditation. And in reality, a lot of Buddhist practice is chanting. But in thinking about about Zen Buddhism and these intersections of physical, mental, and spiritual health, Joyce, could you talk to us a little bit about meditation and the role of meditation has had in your spiritual life?
Okay. It definitely slows down my brain activity and helps me to be less reactive, uh, less stress. Even though I'm going through stress for months, but I think with the daily meditation, the stress level is under control. It's not exploding. I really enjoy meditation because it really opens up my mind and my heart to not focus so much on this the concept of I, me, my, but instead knowing, seeing, behaving that the whole universe is just one body. Um, it, I yeah, I think that really helped me a lot in my life. Well, of course, including the spiritual life. I don't really know how people define their spiritual life. I don't think I can really separate my life from spiritual life. They're together with me for me. And also having Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as models and teachers to guide my action and thoughts. I think that's great for me. Okay, what's your question?
Well, that answered it. Yeah, I mean, what you're getting at is what so many folks will talk about of Buddhism is this entire way of life, and it gets back to what you're talking about. Master Sheng Yen used to teach you about implementing it in your everyday life, and the slowing down of thoughts. One of my teachers always explained it as, your mind is like a horse; it goes really fast, and it's like a monkey, jumps all over the place.
Yes, yeah, monkey mind. That's all common term. Monkey mind. Yeah. So by practicing meditation, I realize, or we realize, there's a lot more than just the monkey mind.
Mm-hmm.
The most of the suffering we feel is actually because we're so attached to the concept of I, me, my. Most of the suffering is really self-constructed. We're not really born or endowed with all the suffering and anxiety and all the difficulties. We are actually born already liberated, free, if we're not so attached to this kind of wrong idea of me, my, I.
That's interesting.
We can just live with everything as a big body. We're considerate, kind, gentle, and there'll be a lot of less self-suffering.
Interesting. So it almost sounds like meditation has taught you to slow down so that you can make more of that free choice on how to act in a thoughtful way rather than just react.
Yes, that's definitely one of the benefits. Actually, as you mentioned earlier, the Vietnamese teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, he advocates that we pause in our daily lives and just pause, take a few deep breaths, and just by doing that, you can feel the difference in your thoughts and reactions.
If you're just joining us, I'm joined with Joyce Yu Pinchao, who is a meditator at the Lincoln Zen Center. And the image on the handout here comes from some recent scientific study on neuroplasticity, which is looking at the brain and what happens to your brain on meditation. And this has been a big focus of a lot of neuroscientists today, because what Joyce was just talking about of how what she's experienced with mind states and kind of choice personally, this has been studied. And so this is something that's interesting in our conversations of intersections of mental, physical, and spiritual health, is that people have wondered what's happening to you physically, what's going on in the mind state in your brain. And so like monks and other meditators have been hooked up to, to wires to see what's going on. And this is what they've showed, is that what Joyce was talking about, kind of feeling like frazzled in the mind before to feeling much more slowed down, has been showed in the brain state as well, which is just really fascinating of thinking about that intersection. And Thich Nhat Hanh, he talked a lot about how meditation's not meant to help us run away from difficulties. It's meant to allow for positive healing to take place. To meditate is to learn how to stop being carried away by our regrets. Most of the time our head is so full of thoughts, we don't have space to listen. Silence allows for deep listening. So can you talk more about that? You were talking about stress, but can you talk a little bit more about that, of what you found in terms of health and wellness through your practice of meditation for, it sounds like for over 20 years. Is that how long you've been meditator?
No,
Not for 20 years. It said
I had a long break. I had a long break after.
You had a long break.
Started with Master Singing. Well, when I started with Master Singing, I couldn't really sit down being awake with doing sitting meditation. So I did a lot of Pure Land practice at that time. But then, just like most everybody, life got so busy and distracted, didn't even feel like finding time to practice. So about maybe 6 years ago, that the right moment came up, and I kind of realized, oh my gosh, I better start practicing again. And then, so at that time I was already living in Lincoln. There was no Pure Land practice here. So I went to the Lincoln Zen Center. Went to Lincoln Zen Center, and then I just stayed to meditate with them. And recently, because of thanks to the pandemic, I have been joining some online practice groups and different Zen centers online, which has been really helpful, very helpful. So I think the benefit for my well-being, one part is it definitely from practicing the sitting and meditation daily. That really changed the pace of my behavior and all the mental activity. And another big part is from the support of other practitioners and support and encouragement from the teachers. So I mean, from their long time practice, they impart a lot of wisdom to us. And with the fellow practitioners, it's really good. It's important for me to have that connection for my practice, and have a sense of a community. In one of Buddha's teaching to his disciple when he was alive was that spiritual friendship is the entirety of a holy life. So I really feel that, and that helps my well-being a lot.
That's really interesting that you say that, because I think sometimes what's promoted as Zen practice is very much the American individualized, you do it on your own, right? You're completely isolated, you can do it however you want, completely on your own. And what I'm hearing you talk about is really the opposite. It's practicing, but in a community of supporters, and that actually that's helped your practice. That's what it sounds like.
Yes, yeah, yeah. That is interesting. It's it takes a lot of individual effort, but we also relied on our community.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I,
And then, yeah, and so often it's not promoted like that. It's really promoted as something you can just do on your. And what I think you're getting at, that I think also is perhaps often a misunderstanding, is that it's a lot harder. You know, it's not what you're talking about is meditation every single day. How long are you meditating every day?
alone.
How long would you say?
Uh, about an hour, and
Um,
I try to do more if I can.
mhm. And I think sometimes what's kind of out there is that, oh, it's you can just go be quiet for 5 minutes and then get back to work, or you know what I mean? It's these like kind of quick fixes.
Well, that also helps if you cannot find a longer time period to sit. Then you can take several short breaks to
Mhm,
meditate.
mhm,
I think Thich Nhat Hanh also promotes that concept because most people are just way too busy.
mhm,
Mm.
mhm. Yeah, but that frequency maybe is what's important of um like you were talking about, of throughout the day of
Yeah,
um
actually, I think taking several pause
your pause.
throughout the day is really good, and that becomes your daily routine. Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, one of the, in a lot of Buddhist texts, so Joyce has used the word sutra, that's the term for Buddhist texts. And there's, in Mahayana and East Asian traditions, there are so many sutras. It's really, really big. But in a lot of texts, the Buddha is actually often likened to a doctor, that referring that suffering in terms of physical and emotional pain stems from our mind states, stems from thoughts, that they're kind of symptoms of a deeper pain of selfishness. And so practice is both meditation and compassion. And Joyce, could you talk a little bit about that, of how meditation, you alluded to this before, but how through the practice of meditation, how does that support being compassionate? That's something that's actually promoted a lot at SCC, is being very compassionate. And meditation is one of those things that's seen as kind of beyond religious doctrine. Just kind of contemplation is just a universal practice. And so I'm wondering how meditation has supported being more compassionate in your life.
it has benefited a lot for me to cultivate compassion or let my inborn compassion come out.
Mm,
Oh, I think there are several ways. Buddha gave many teachings on the techniques and all the different aspects or and ideas you can meditate on.
mm,
I mean, meditations. There are different, also many different ways of meditating. So in our Soto Zen, we don't really meditate on images or concepts, but there are other teachings also from Buddha that you can meditate on loving kindness between you and others, and and of course there are more details. Like one thing you can meditate on is uh, knowing the fact, contemplating on the fact that everybody else is just like yourself. Everybody's motivation of their thoughts, actions is just to seek happiness and to avoid suffering. It's kind of like the term that put yourself in their shoes, or some Asian teachers say put their feet in your own shoes. And anyway, it's the sense of sadness. So if you know why you do certain things for your own happiness and to avoid suffering, then you would be then when you after you contemplate on that concept, then when you see others doing things you disapprove, you can start to put yourself in their shoes that, oh, the way they did that was to create happiness for themselves, just like you would do something maybe other people would disapprove, that when you are seeking happiness for yourself. So that's one way to cultivate your compassion. And I think in our Zen sitting, it's more like we let go of all the preconception and let go of the self let go of the small self, and then you be one with the entire universe, be one with everything. And in that way, you are already compassionate because your mind and heart is not just inside this physical body. Your heart and mind are so big and wide and vast beyond boundary. It includes everything. You're already a compassionate.
So when you're already thinking in that interconnected way, then
Yeah.
you kind of naturally act in an interconnected way, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So when your mind what heart are so big, there's no separation between that person and I, or that animal, that insect and I. There's no separation. Why would you hurt them?
So Zen meditation and meditation in general has been, a practice that folks of all various religious traditions have taken on, and we've seen it a lot during the pandemic. Both meditation and yoga have been really important to people across religious traditions. And what do you think about Zen that makes it so that it is a practice that is kind of beyond religion, that's kind of beyond Buddhism, that we see folks in all traditions practicing Zen. Can you say a little bit about that, of how it becomes so universal, and what makes it that way?
I think this practice really close to our hearts. It's really such a natural, inborn thing we can do. It's so simple. You just sit down. Almost everybody can sit down
Mm,
if without any physical disability. We simply sit and just let the body breathe.
mm,
You don't I don't know what the brain scientists have studied, that if there's any part in this body to say, okay, let's breathing in now and breathing breathing out now. But for me, it just feels like your body and the universe is just doing it. You
mhm,
don't even need to learn.
mhm,
It's such a nice from my experience, Zen meditation is kind of like really putting down, peeling off all the learned things we learned throughout life, kind of rolling back to the very basic human body.
mm. Interesting. So it's you're returning to yourself rather than going somewhere. Mm,
Right. So like when you were born, you didn't come out with a label of your name, your language, all those things. All those are learned. You, so we can just put those down.
mm,
Just simply be part of the universe.
interesting. Mm. And that would allow it to go across religious traditions, because it's not about what you particularly believe in or and those sorts of things. It's really just a time to breathe
Right.
and
Yeah.
contemplate and come back.
Mhm. For yes, for the meditation part is, I think, is, yeah, it is across religion.
Mm,
But however, for me, I prefer to be a Buddhist and I have Buddhas as my teacher, as my guide. So I can learn from them.
interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm joined here today with Joyce Yu Pinchao, who is practicing Buddhist at the Lincoln Zen Center. If you have questions that you want to ask, please feel free to do so in the chat. I still have some more questions. For Joyce, I also wanted, and because sometimes folks need to head out early, and I wanted to make sure that we have a few acknowledgements of resources, and I'll share this on the Global Ed page as well. But I wanted to give kind of, part of this series is thinking about inclusivity across campus. And so I wanted to give a few kind of tips from what we've been hearing today, and kind of some tips and some resources in case you want to take this further, and kind of to think about building inclusivity across campus spaces. What to know about American and Asian American Buddhists is that Buddhist traditions look and feel very different depending on the tradition. And so this is kind of how we started the series today, and then kind of this conclusion. And so what I've done is I've given different examples of this. So I linked to a video of a healing ritual at a Vietnamese temple in Philadelphia. This is an annual medicine Buddha ceremony. So if you're encouraged in really kind of exploring the diversity of these spaces, watch that video. It's really short. It's great. I also linked to a video or audio of, in the Tibetan tradition, some folks are chanting and praying every single day to end coronavirus. So in many Buddhist traditions, as Joyce was talking about before, chant is really important. And 90% of Buddhists kind of generally chant and not doing seated meditation, because as Joyce was talking about, people are busy. And so I think that's always a big shocker sometimes. And so that links to a story about how they've responded to coronavirus and sending healing into the world. And so there's a prayer from the Tibetan tradition, and then monks chanting every day, which also gets into the role of talismans, prayer, ritual, and health. And then I also linked to the Zen meditation resources, and how to, if kind of thinking about starting out with meditation. So before I get to the last two resources, Joyce, can you talk a little bit about that? If, as an experienced meditator, someone were to start meditation, what's the starting point, do you think?
It's good to do it daily. You don't have to do a long time every day, but a daily practice is better than trying to find 30 minutes once a week.
Interesting.
Yeah. So if you can just sit in your chair, I mean, when you watch those instruction videos, a lot of them tell you to sit on a cushion on the floor, but it's really for people's busy lives, like your teachers and staff on campus. You can just sit in your office chair. Don't lean to the back of your chair. Sit in the front half, and then have a strong and supportive spine. Tucking your chin a little bit, and take some deep breaths. Relax all your muscles and tensions, and then just naturally breathe in and out through your nose for like 5-10 minutes if you can. You do the few times a day. It's like every time when you sit down in your office chair, you just follow your breath for several minutes if you can do that. I mean, a daily routine. Doing the daily really, makes more part of you. It becomes a routine. It's just like, in the morning you go grab a cup of coffee. It just you just want to get that action become part of you, and then so doing the daily is really important.
Yeah, I've heard Thich Nhat Hanh talk about how almost in a way it's almost like preventative healthcare, because it's almost like it's preparing you for those stressful situations. So kind of that periodic breathing is preparing you to breathe during times of stress. Have you found that as well? By practicing breathing, then you're better at breathing later. You know what I mean by that?
Yes. That's a great point.
So we have time for aspects of questions and chat. I do want to recognize these final resources just so that you have them. One important component of today also is recognizing what we've seen across the nation in terms of anti-Asian racism, and really this isn't what I hope from today is brought up is really been the diversity of Buddhist traditions that we have in Southeast Nebraska, and the diversity of Asian communities. And so if you want to kind of get more insight into that, not just specifically Buddhism, but kind of different accounts, here's a great article that's an important account of experiencing life. And then if you are interested in any sort of healing rituals or practices that are really kind of honoring Asian American ancestors, I want to let you know about an event that's happening coming up on Tuesday, May 4th, and it's going to be all through Zoom, and it's a gathering ceremony to honor Asian American ancestors. And there's also a really great book that has recently come out from a woman I went to grad school with. Her name's Chung Xing Han, and she wrote this text called Be the Refuge, and it's raising the voices of Asian American Buddhists. So really recognizing the diversity. So I wanted to leave you with some of those resources and really kind of think about the diversity and plurality of Asian American traditions, Buddhist traditions, and how rich Nebraska is, but then also that there are some components that we have seen that have really kind of universalized within American culture as well. So if you have any questions, we do have time for any sort of questions or chat. So feel free to add those to the chat box. Joyce, what was one of the hardest things when you started to meditate? What were some of kind of the hard things especially when you were thinking about meditating for longer periods of time? What was challenging? Oh, I think, let's see. I can't hear you.
I got.
There you go.
I felt sleepy, or even just fell asleep during meditation a lot. That was very challenging. That's why I switched to Pure Land chanting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that chanting kept me awake. So anyway, from that experience, I recommend meditating in the early morning after you get up.
Oh, when you're fresh.
Yeah.
I used to have students would always ask me to kind of force them to they would say, would you please put meditation as a requirement? Because we all want to meditate. We all hear about the importance of mindfulness, how it helps with academic success, force us to meditate. And so I would, and they would talk about how, well, I meditated at night and I fell asleep. So, yeah, so that's interesting that you say that. So probably also not after a big meal. You'd probably also
right. It's better to do it before meal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, before the meal. Nice. Shauna, thanks for that point. I added that handout is now in the chat, so it's accessible to everyone. Yeah, that's great. And monks in the Chan tradition, some monks that I've in monasteries that I've visited, they're only eating once a day, and they're then meditating. That's the case, at least in mainland China. Was that the case in the Taiwanese monasteries that you visited as well?
I think in Taiwan they can eat 2 meals.
2 meals, so a noon and then an evening, or a morning and noon.
Yeah, they eat morning and noon, but it's getting more flexible these days, because these days monks they're busy helping lay people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
So they are actually out working different things, helping a lot. So they need to eat to keep up with the energy. I mean, in the olden days, monks usually live in those big monasteries out in the mountain. They didn't come out to mingle much with the lay people, so they didn't have to eat a lot, and they sat more. So sitting didn't take too much energy, so it was okay to eat less.
Mhm.
So I think that, yeah, the eating, they're not so strict right these days. At least in Taiwan, I know that.
Mhm.
You know,
Interesting.
so yeah, one thing about our Buddhist practice is we consider moderation, not too much or not too little, and being flexible. So if monks they need to eat to support it to give the energy to do
Mhm.
things with they can.
Interesting. And that again really gets to this intersection of the physical body with the mind. So if you're not eating enough and then that makes you exhausted with the mind, then you change the body. But if you're eating too much, then you may not be a very effective teacher
Right.
because you're sleepy or
Yeah.
not yourself. That's
Exactly.
very interesting.
Mhm.
Nice. Thank you. There's a few minutes left. If anyone has any questions, I do want to thank everyone for coming and thank Joyce very much for giving us her time today. Our last Global Learning at Lunch is in 2 weeks, and we'll be covering health and wellness and Hindu traditions. And everything is kept on the Global Ed website, and you all have the handout for today. So kind of one of my final questions is about apps. Have you used any of the app-based meditations? I'm sure not.
I have not, but
Have not.
I know people do. A Zen friend says she has the Tina Hong's Plum Village app.
Mm.
So in that Plum Village app, it goes off, I guess, every hour to remind you to stop,
Mhm,
take a few breaths.
mhm,
She thought that helpful.
mhm. Yeah, I think I know the one she's talking about. It's a mindfulness bell, and it
Okay.
at least one of them, and it dings on your phone every hour
Mhm.
to just remind you of time passing, which is interesting when you begin to think about that we need to be reminded of time passing. It's true. I mean, you'll do something and then it's 2 hours later and you think, what happened to the time? Um,
Mhm.
yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah, there's a lot of apps out there that various folks try with and figure out. And if anyone on the call today too wants any sort of documentaries or anything about kind of the monastic communities that Joyce is talking about, to let me know as well. But we are at the 1 o'clock hour, and I want to be very considerate of everyone's time. Thanks so much for coming, Joyce. Thank you very much for being here. We very much appreciate it. And for those of you on the call, thanks so much for coming. And we hope to see you at the final Lunch and Learn in a couple of weeks.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone.